Hello, Martial Arts Journey Tribe. Let me do the thing. Where's my... Come. Bosa. He's saying hello as well, as always. So it's good to see you all today at a bit of a different time than usual, but that's because we're talking to a great guest at the other side of the world. Usually I live in the future. I live like 10 hours ahead of my guests who are in the States, but now my guest lives in the future. He lives in Australia, who is Jeff Phillips. I'm really excited to have him here. You might have seen the video where I already talked to him about Krav Maga, but it was a bit of a short version. Today we'll go deep into analyzing the whole situation, a bit about into his background. So we're going to cover a lot of fascinating subjects. Just to give you a few hints of who Jeff Phillips is or what's his background. So he was a former Krav Maga instructor who became disillusioned with the practice and eventually quit it. So similar to my experience with Aikido, I could say, but Krav Maga, usually people think it's way better, but we'll still discuss that. Jeff also has an impressive background of being a former kickboxing champion, silver medalist at state boxing championships. He fought in Thai and amateur MMA fights, so he really knows what fighting is about. He also trained in traditional martial art. I guess some people would already kill me for saying traditional martial art, but I was about to say Jeet Kune Do, submission wrestling, and freestyle wrestling. So he tried it all, which is really cool. At the moment, he is the chief instructor of Western Combatives, and he's also, interestingly enough, and the reason I got to know him is he's the instructor of Matt from the YouTube channel Reality Check Self-Defense, a channel I highly recommend checking out. So we'll be starting the discussion in a moment, but just to give you a heads up, at the second half of our talk, we'll be having a Q&A where we'll be answering your questions. So stick around until then. And if you really want to make sure that your question pops out and we get to see it, there's the option to use the super chat at the bottom of the live chat. So consider that option as well. So without further ado, as always, I invite you to grab your preferred beverage and let's get this journey started. So hello, Jeff. Good to see you.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, you too. How are you?
I'm good. How are you yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I want to start by congratulating you on, like, in Lithuania, English isn't your first language. Would that be fair to say?
True, absolutely
And
true.
there were so many comments stating that they understood you, but they didn't understand me, who is our first language. So yeah, you one up on me there. So good job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thank Cartoon Network for teaching me English.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's funny. I didn't think about it, but I guess Australian accent. It's Australian, right?
yes. Yeah.
Right. So it took me some time in the past. I had a friend who we kept talking with, and in the beginning, I had to like really like listen in, and now I'm like, what do people just don't understand? This is like a completely normal way of speaking, but I guess some people need time.
Yeah, and I'm a teacher as well. So
Oh,
over here, I enunciate my words really well. It just, yeah, apparently out in the YouTube world, it's inadequate. So there you go.
it's crazy. It's crazy. At the same time, obviously, I don't want to put us through this subject too far, but I think a lot of some of the viewers are from like Arabian countries and like Middle East, Asia. They have, their English is they're like struggling. Some people struggle with my English. They say I speak too fast. Where I'm
Yeah,
like, I speak too fast. It's not even my native tongue. But
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess we never know who's watching.
yeah, that's it.
Cool. So again, it's really good to have you here. Thank you for finding the time. Our video we did about Krav Maga is already exploding through the internet, so it'll be very cool to dig deeper into the whole thing. So I know we discussed this a little bit, and usually I like to start with asking for a brief introduction, but you mentioned you have your own twist to it. So
Yeah,
what
yeah.
do you
Like I just see. I think what I've done doesn't mean anything.
Mm.
What's more important is the material I present or the thoughts and concepts and things like that. So, if I was the milkman, not that there is such a thing anymore, but if I'm telling you the right thing, if I'm saying all the right things and I can back it up, then doesn't that have validity rather than going through an elaborate story? Because half the stories that I hear in this industry of what people have done and what people do, it's dishonest. Some of the things, some of the stories, and their war stories and whatnot. You look at them train, you're like, you didn't do that. Like, so
Yeah.
I'd rather like the other stuff first, and people
Right.
decide whether or not it's worth listening to, and if it's if I raise any valid points, and at the end, if we have time, like I'll talk a little bit about what I've done. But yeah, I think material stands alone. The thoughts, the critical thinking, all that kind of stuff should be elevated higher than anything I've done. So if we could do
Yeah.
that, it'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you're saying, and it actually reminded me of this thing. I released a lot of videos, so I never expect people to have seen them. But there's one where I looked at these suspicious, specifically Aikido teachers, which is already like, how can you be like a suspicious Aikido teacher? Like Aikido is suspicious enough on its own. But having said that, I looked at the guys and then his colleagues, bio. And it's like an endless list. Like they're special forces, commando, and they're like super knife fighting, extra special defense instructor. It's like, and that's like I came to a conclusion that if you have this super long list of things you've done, then probably it's bullshit.
And you need to be able to back it up. You're putting yourself out there that you're some kind of killer. And if you're not that, your mouth's writing checks that you can't cash. Like it's, yeah. So I don't want to do that.
Yeah, for sure. This is a bit of a jump then to one of the questions on my list, but I think that's a good point to bring that up. So why do you personally think people do that? Like make these elaborate fake bios, etc.
It's like it reminds me of there was I listened to this podcast and it spoke about sales techniques, and one was for a real estate agent where a person who wanted to buy a home rung up, and the receptionist would answer and say, I can't answer that question. I'll put you through to my manager who has had 30 years of experience, and running through this, elaborate sort of resume before they answer the question, so that the person who's on the other end of the phone is like, oh yeah, I can trust this guy. He knows what he's talking about theoretically, and I'm in capable hands, kind of thing. And I think this carries through, like in this industry, massively. There's so many people out there that say things, and there was one example that we had where one of my students sort of called out a local guy. I won't get too much detail, but he called him out and basically said, what you're doing is nonsense. You blah, blah. And this instructor sort of called me up and was like, oh, you know what? Can you call your student off? And I was like, no, this guy's a loose cannon. I can't control him. He may show up. And he's like, oh, he claimed that I don't know what I'm talking about, but after 30 years working in security and 30 years in the martial arts industry, I know what I'm talking about. And I'm just thinking, so why are you ringing me up scared? Like, if you can do all this stuff, it shouldn't be a problem to have some guy coming in that's, just an average Joe. Shouldn't be an issue for you. So again, people put themselves on these pedestals by saying these things initially. And yeah, like, there are days when I walk into the gym and I train like dog shit. Like, people, beginners, land shots on me, kicks on me that shouldn't get through. And, we're all human. We all have days. And, there's days like I look like $1 million. And it just, yeah, I don't want to put myself out there to be something that I'm not, or claim to be something that I'm not.
True. That's a great point, and it also makes me think. I guess also it's a good point you made about good days and bad days. Like none of us are invincible, and I think people who really go through combat sports and training, the fighting thing, they know that they're like on a bad day they can catch a sucker punch or whatever. Like they're not immortal. Those people who are training fantasy-based martial arts, they think that they can beat like 10 opponents or something. But at the same time, I think if somebody comes into a boxing gym and wants to call out the coach, I think, probably the coach would be able to handle some random guy. I mean, they would have that confidence. Or a lot of people these days blame me for being like a BJJ fanboy, which I don't think that's true. But I'm also thinking about the Gracie challenges, when they were like, come and try us out and we'll pay you money if you win. And I think, that confidence comes from direct experience versus just making a list of I did this and that.
Yeah. And it's just, yeah, like I was saying, just people feel the need to validate themselves. And I know one true example of people lying is they'll say all these elaborate stories to convince themselves, and much less the other person. And yeah, perhaps they're doing that. Perhaps they don't have that self belief that they have to, say all these things and
Mm.
uh, to build themselves up. Like I couldn't imagine ringing up and go, "I've been training for 30 years." Like that's just yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Yeah, I wonder if I told you specifically that story or if someone else, but I said it recently, but there was someone in my comments saying, "Oh, I had this many fights and this and that, and I should I should teach you martial arts or something like that." I was like, you know what? I'm like I met some really top level coaches, and they're the most humble people. They never speak about their achievements. They never brag.
Yeah,
The people who brag are the the suspicious
yeah.
ones.
Oh, there was one guy who, in particular, who came into the gym one day, and he sat me down like an hour, 2 hours before the class, and he's going through he was in this military, he was in this, he's done this long, long thing, and he was in the, some international army and studied Krav Maga, and then he lifted up his shirt and showed me where he got stabbed in one side and where it came out the other, and spat his teeth out and was showing me like, and I'm just like, man, you should be running the class. Like if this is it, he's no, I'm humble. I just take him along and I submit to you. And he got in there, and I thought straight to the advanced class, and I still remember like he got in there, and this relative beginner just lit him up, because I threw him in the deep end, thinking, hey, you're that good. And it's just like, to me, it's like me standing in front of an Olympic swimming pool saying, I could beat Michael Phelps. You're going to get wet. We're going to see that. We're going to work it out. We've been doing this for a while. We know what we can see. Why? Like why? Like it's crazy. And right before class, I was about to see. You didn't have to explain all this stuff. I'm about to see it in 5 minutes' time, whether you're good or not. And yeah, I have people.
So that also brings me to ask another question here, and it's a debate I have personally, and I don't really know the answer. Like those long listed bios and claims that these instructors make. I wonder. So you mentioned your first take was kind of like it's like a selling strategy, like a sales strategy,
Yeah.
which makes sense. But do you also think that there are cases where, in some bizarre way, they believe it themselves? Do you think that happens as well?
Well, that guy that called me up, I think he sincerely believed that he could fight, but
Mm.
which is why I'm sort of puzzled that he didn't take up that guy's sort of challenge. And in the end, like he's like pretty much asking me, "Can you stop him?" And I'm like, "He's a grown man. He's an adult. I can't stop him." And I wanted to stir him a little bit. I'm like, "Oh, he's a loose cannon. If I were you, I'd lock your doors. Like he could show up at any moment. Like if he's pissed off right now, he's on his way. That sort of thing." And I stirred him up a little bit, but I just thought, on one hand, he's acting supremely confident, but when it came time for the practical application of it, and in essence, people can say, "Oh, that's immature." Like we're martial artists. We're not fighters. What are we doing it for? Like I call a duck a duck. I got into this
Right.
game so that if someone started me, I could hurt them. Yeah, there's no like great reason behind it. Just that I want to be able to handle myself. That's it. Like it's not discipline. It's not honor. I don't think I'm a samurai reincarnated. Um, I just want to be able to throw hands, and if someone lays hands on me, I like to be able to take care of myself, basically.
Mm. Uh, so I wonder as well. So to give a bit of a brief story to bring context in Aikido, my main background, I personally always had a doubt, like even at the highest level I achieved, and I was high ranking, etc. But I always had that inner nagging feeling, like I'm not really confident, but my instructors were boosting me. I was boosting myself, like, no, this is gonna work, this is gonna work. But I had to like mentally push that thought. I also had met other Aikidoka who I noticed that they have that doubt as well.
Yeah,
Like I personally believe, and it's just a hypothesis, but I think all of us had that doubt because we were basically living a lie.
yeah.
Uh, what about Krav Maga? Do you think that did you notice that doubts being somewhere there, that maybe what we're doing is not entirely legit?
Yeah, like I still remember we had this guy come to our gym from the US. He was a wrestler, a collegiate wrestler, and yeah, he decided to come train with us. And this guy was an absolute weapon. So he was 100 kilograms, no fat on him. He worked at there's a chicken farm sort of a little bit away, which he came over, and that's what he was doing while he was here. He would work all day, this physical labor. He would get on his bike, push bike, right, or his bicycle, I don't know the correct terminology, ride it to our gym, which is about an hour ride. He'd get there an hour before everyone. He'd pick up this 50-kilo medicine ball and he'd throw it around for an hour, do 2 classes, which was 2 hours worth, do a little bit more, and then ride home. And when it came to sparring, I was like, oh shit, like if anyone's going to expose us, it's going to be this guy. Like he was an absolute beast. And thankfully, like with what he did, it, you know, I don't want to be the Mr. Kick the groin sort of business, but quite often when he'd wrestle, he would be open for a lot of different strikes. Like he'd wrestle front on with his legs sort of somewhat apart. And some of the guys managed to knee him, kick him, and, you know, he wasn't that good at evading punches and things like that. So thankfully, when he first came out as a pure wrestler, we sort of had his number. But then by the time he left, I think he trained with us for about a year. By the time he left and he learnt to adjust it and sort of tweak it a little bit, man, that guy, like the ceiling for him compared to everyone else was just so far greater. Like, so yeah, it was one experience where there was a little bit of doubt, and we've had people from all kinds of arts come in, and I've always said, look, if someone comes in and, you know, cleans the floor with us or wipes the floor with us or, I'll step aside and say this guy's now the instructor. But it sort of hasn't happened as yet. Like it hasn't, you know, we haven't had many challenges, granted. And I'll be the first to say, like where I live, there's a lot of really good, there's quite a few guys that have been in the UFC or currently fight in the UFC. Now, if then one of them rocked up, like, yeah, we're in trouble. But, you know, yeah. And I guess too, they're always, if you're honest about it, there is doubt because you know, like look at the UFC and the champions, how quickly they're always changing. Different stuff match up well against others and that kind of thing. So on any given day, anyone can potentially lose a fight. So yeah. So
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's a great point that if you're being honest about what you're doing, then you're going to have doubt. And I really like that there's that point where you said that if you notice that someone comes in who's better, you'll have no problem saying, oh, can you step in and teach? While I think in traditional martial arts, I noticed like there are stories as well. I heard numerous of them. People like to tell their stories when they resonate with my story, and they tell about when somebody comes in, challenges the instructor, punches him or takes him down, and the instructor stands up and says, oh no, you punched wrong. Let me show you how you should punch. You know, this power play.
Yeah, we have another story about that we had another art in, and this guy solemnly believed in what he did. And so basically some of my guys did his classes, and one day there was a guy who got a little bit sort of tired of the way they trained and said, hey, can we do this instead? Can we spar? And he's like, okay. And my mate was legitimately scared. He was a keto too, by the way, because he thought if he grabs his wrist, he's going to tear his arm off. And the first guy jumped in was a white belt, and they had no gloves on him. And my mate, who was a big guy, was shout out to the beast. He wouldn't. He would have torn him apart throwing punches if he wanted to, but he's a good guy. So he didn't, and he engaged in a wrestle with him just to see how they went, because kind of that close quarters is where a lot of it lies. And he ended up picking the guy up, dumping him into the ground, and then choking him out. So then he dropped out, and then he put like his brown belt or something in, and same thing happened. And then he dragged them aside, the instructor, and sort of blasted them and said, you're not doing what I told you, and blah, blah, blah. And like, in my opinion, the way they trained it was wrong. The things they focused on, it wasn't fighting, it was something else. And you know what? Which is, if that's what you do, that's cool. I got no problem with that. But don't think you're going to get over into a realm of fighting if you're not fighting.
For sure. Something else that came up for me from what you mentioned just before about tweaking fighters,
Yeah.
and that there's that debate online where some people, and I think these are pro traditional martial artists per se, where they're trying to find flaws in combat sports, and I think to some degree it's true. Combat sports are not perfect. That's not self-defense,
No.
but there's a claim that if you're just learning to fight, let's say in MMA, boxing, whatever, then you're screwed in the streets because there's no eye gouging and there's bricks and stuff and biting and there's all sorts of things they come up with. Which I think is true to some degree, but they make it extreme. Like if you know how to fight in the cage, that's not going to help you in quote unquote the street.
Yeah, yeah.
But a friend of mine, Paul Sharp, self-defense instructor, he said that these guys would come to him and to like self-defense courses, and there would be what he would call civilians. I think that's from police force training, like regular people, and there would be those fighters. And those fighters, they would need to learn, do this, don't do that, adjust this, adjust that. But once they would be tweaked, they're like, you would not want to mess with them,
Yeah,
quote, in the street. So,
yeah.
so what do you think about that whole debate? Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. When I say tweak it, there are things that, I did a video where I had a circle on the board and I'd say, if this was this system, and I took a whiteboard mark, sort of an eraser and rubbed out part of it and said, if we use boxing, it becomes this big because we can't do this, can't do that, the other. We do wrestling, we can't do that, the other, and minimize it. And it becomes, street applicable, I guess, without a better word. And a couple of examples of that is, back when I wrestled, I needed surgery on my knee from the constant shooting, like just dropping to my knee constantly. And I figured doing that on concrete, yeah, I can see how that could go wrong. But the thing that I think is they're not that different really. So I've had a couple of fights out of the ring, in the ring. I've had a couple of each. They both somewhat felt the same. So someone trying to take my head off under both instances, what was going through my head was more or less similar. The only difference was the people in the ring were trained fighters. They were trained killers. They were people that are doing, if they were doing what I was doing, it was, 6 days a week, twice a day sessions, whereas these other people in pubs and clubs are pissheads that just drink beer and don't do anything. So from that context, the ring fighters was sort of a lot better. But the only area where I think it needs to be tweaked, or the main area, is context. So combat sports don't necessarily provide context. So, all the pre-fight stuff and just little telltale signs of the pre-contact cues, if, is a buzzword in the industry where people are setting it up, they're talking to you, you're in the pub, they're talking and they're adjusting their feet and putting themselves in a position to hit you. Those little nuances is what combat sport lacks, because it's not touch glove to come out fighting. Like if I think of times that I've been in fights, like, I've been punched in the back of the head walking through a crowd, things like that. There was no touch gloves and square off. It's like, it's on. So just the context is different, but those skills absolutely come across. If you change them a little bit and alter some things, like the wrestling guy I was talking about, he was an absolute weapon when he left, like he was before he got there, and I think he was a slightly better, slightly sharper weapon when he left. So 100%, like it does carry over. It just needs to be, the context, I guess, needs to be set, and that's where things like scenario training to a degree comes in, and just the way it's set up. Because we do, like the way we train, we have a lot of we do a lot of combat sports type sparring, but we allow throwing kicks and headbutts and whatnot. But then we take it out of the gym and put it in an office setting, and that's like, well, geez, if I was a good kicker, I don't have the space to be able to do that now, so that drops out. And it just minimization, I guess. We've cut away different things. And,
I think you're almost started to answer my next question, but something I wanted to ask is, I think, again, it's like if you say something is white, then it means something is not black naturally, although it can be, it can be both sometimes in life. So I don't think it's a complete statement, but some could say that if you want to get as close to a fighting experience, then getting into a cage could be that with the safety circumstances on. But I think there's still more maybe to push the level through. And I think you're the right person to ask. How do you get your people to get as close to that real experience yourself?
So the like you said, the trouble with that is safety, or what you need to do is you need to tread carefully just because of the safety sort of issues. But like again, having a fighting background before getting into the reality base, like it was a blessing. Like it's really helped further us along. And I've just sat there and said, and I'm also a sports coach, and I coach basketball, and for basketball training, we're not out playing table tennis. It's irrelevant. So our basketball training is predominantly playing basketball. So we need to do that, and we need to do it and replicate it as close as possible to the actual event. And this is where, like, I've put up a number of videos on YouTube, and the comment I often get where people are trying to hurt my feelings, they say, "Oh, this looks like a drunken pub brawl," and expecting a reaction. And I'm like, thanks. That's what we're training for. That's exactly what we're trying to replicate, because that's what it's about. So we take it and we put it in all the environments. And again, a lot of common sense is used. Like we've done some stuff where you could look at and go, oh, we're close to the edge there. Like when Matt had one of the King of the West fights, we call it, our little tournament, he was fighting on a bridge. And things could go wrong on there. Like we're all standing around ready to catch him. Sometimes I've had to pull the pin. I had this guy who was a massive Star Wars fan, and he loved that scene with Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. There are some people that come in just for the fantasy element, not that fantasy element, but you know what I mean? Like they want Jason Bourne. And so in our facility, there's this really high thing that looks like where they had that battle where he lost his arm, and this guy's like, yeah, can we spar up there? And I was like, oh, okay. And we started, and I'm like, one of us trips, we're dead. Like, let's, because it was up really, really high. So we just use common sense. We've also got a padded room that we can manipulate and turn into anything. So I've got this room that I've padded out, and I've got all these padded furniture and lounges and stuff. And we, for example, some McDonald's employees came in and we put up a bench, a soft bench, and we did stuff like that they could do. We put it up make it look like a cell for people that work in corrections. We make it look like people's living rooms. You name it. We just monitor it. And having that soft furniture, when you fall, it's like your head hits it and you go, you know what? If I didn't have that soft furniture, it probably would have knocked me out. But it's soft, so I'm okay. And just by acknowledging it and doing that, like it's got to be if that's reality, training's got to match it. It can't be down here. If the intensity in a fight, or a street fight, self-defense, whatever you want to call it, is a 10 out of 10. If you train at 6 out of 10 as your top, that's a massive gap that you're going to have to jump. And most people can't bridge that gap on the spot, on the fly.
For sure. Yeah, I think absolutely that was one of the big challenges for me as an Aikido practitioner, is that the difference is so huge. Like we're in a very nice looking Japanese dojo with mats, and we're wearing man skirts, and we're so polite to each other. There's bowing, and the strikes are traditional, and it's just such a calm and peaceful environment. Then when I would get attacked, there would be adrenaline and there was everything. I was like, fuck, what do I do now? But then as soon as I started training, I started off with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then MMA. I think the confidence still has to be smart. But I was like, when somebody was threatening me, I was like, I've been to more intense places than this random drunk guy. I'm getting into the cage with these fighters, and now this random drunk guy is threatening me. I'm like, I've seen worse.
100%. Like that's it. It's one huge thing that the combat sports has taught me. Like I get out and do public speaking and things like that in front of massive crowds, and it all pales in comparison to going in front of 500 people, taking your shirt off and fighting another guy. Everything pales in comparison to that. And I always use that as a reference point for things that I do, and nothing compares. Like nothing, every single time that I got in that ring, cage, whatever, I didn't want to be in there. My head's saying, don't go, turn around, you can leave now, pretend you're sick. But, pride made me continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a crazy experience. It's such a bizarre experience to because I think that our whole natural instinct is just against that, but we
Yeah.
find something deeper in ourselves which just pushes us to do it. It's really interesting, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I recommend it. Like, would I want my kids to do it? No. Other people, like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, it's a really good experience to do just once.
Yeah,
Like that's why there's those boxing days. One of the guys from my gym winning one of those white collar boxing days, and yeah, like it's just the impact it's had on him is huge. Like, yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Good
yeah.
experience.
Yeah, and I'll bring us actually to the list of questions in a moment. But yeah, I think I'm thinking the same. After I did my first MMA fight, people would ask me sometimes as well, like, should I do it? And my also instinct was to say, yeah, I think to do it at least once, to
Yeah,
know that you were able to, because again, it's just such a crazy even notion. You're getting into a literal cage where you're literally locked in, and the
yeah,
only reason you two are there is basically to hurt each other. It's
yeah,
just like why would you do that on your own reason? But if you're
yeah,
able to, then it's
yeah,
just like so many things don't compare to it. So yeah,
yeah. Oh, it's a good experience. Like for that alone, and also to test yourself. Like
yeah,
to pick yourself up off the canvas, or to fight through after being rocked and things like that. It's really easy to tap out or to take a knee or whatever, but just to
yeah,
continue. Like I remember this. I had one fight where this guy who was supposed to be a taekwondo guy had no hands. He kept landing these bombs on me with his hands. I'm like, this isn't meant to be happening. And I kept thinking. I remember the thought popped into my head: if you go down now, it's all over. And I'm looking out and there's 800 people there, and I'm like, no, 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 we don't go out like that. Like push on, sort of thing. And yeah,
for
it teaches
sure.
you a lot about yourself.
For sure, yeah, and again, you just keep saying these great things, and I want to bounce off, but that there's that thing too, and again, I almost like lately I got a bunch of comments telling that saying that I'm a BJJ fanboy, and I hate when people do that to me, but I see where they come from, but
Yeah,
still, nevertheless, I'm taking sometimes that as one of my reference points.
yeah,
In the beginning when you're, and I think the same probably would apply to wrestling and MMA too. So when let's say a 120-kilo guy is crushing you and you can barely breathe and you want to tap out just because of that experience, but
yeah,
you're not doing that because okay, this is not really like I'm not really being tapped out, but there's that panic where you want to, but you're fighting against that, or there's so many situations where you're tempted to tap out, but you're not. I think that makes you so much of a stronger person,
yeah.
able to not panic when you're panicking in a way.
Yeah, yeah. It teaches you a lot. There's like, and also there's a thing I always talk about, taken from the movie Courage Under Fire. So
Hmm.
while someone's raining punches down on you, to not go into a shell, to not as the beginners do things like that, to be calm under there, like and to fire back is again it's another big step to I guess self improvement, particularly in this industry. And same with other sports I played. Like I used to play basketball, and then I I would shy away from contact a little bit, and then now after all that other stuff, I run into it. It's my best asset. Like I know I'm not fragile anymore. I run into
Right.
people. I do all this stuff. Like it's good. It's good.
Um, so okay, I'm finally ready to bring us to
Let's
official
do it.
questions.
Yeah, yeah,
But it just I feel we have a very good flow of conversation. So,
yeah,
so in terms of official question to the official subject, we didn't look deeply into your background yet, but
yep.
what led you? What would you say would? And maybe just if you could say, if did you practice combat sports before doing Krav Maga? And if
Yes. Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
led you to go to Krav Maga?
Um, at the end of all the other stuff that I did, I kind of stopped it. I realized I'm not a combat sports guy in that I had this fight where I hurt a guy pretty badly, and I felt a little bit guilty. I
Mm,
felt a little bit bad, and I just thought I don't have that killer instinct, like um, to go up against the guy who's done nothing to me.
mm,
They did something to me. Different story, I'd imagine, but I finished this fight and had a beer with this guy, and I'm like, man, why was I trying to take this guy's head off? He was a cool guy, and I just kind of retired. There was a bunch of things that sort of happened around that, and I was like, well, my life's work. I've just spent, a couple of decades studying fighting and things like that, and I'm just going to walk away from it. Like, what's a positive sort of spin I can do from it? And I started to look into it, and I thought, like I was doing a women's self-defense class at the time, like for my mate at his gym, and I was basically teaching them kickboxing. And I kind of had this moment where I was holding the pad for this girl, and I dropped it for some reason. She kicked me as hard as she could in the ribs, and I was like, it didn't hurt. Like, this stuff is not going to work, and also at the time, I was a sparring partner. A friend of mine fought in the actual UFC, and he and I stand up, we're even. He'd take me to ground, and he'd manhandle me. He had about 20 kilos on me, and I was technically better on the ground than he was at the time. And I'm like, these two things aren't helping me. Like, if it was self-defense and he was waiting by my car, he would just beat me because he's bigger than me, and that's not fair. Like, I got to find an equalizer. So I guess I drank the Kool-Aid on Krav there about being, the equalizer. I had two options. I was going to go to a JKD school or Krav Maga. They were my two I sort of stumbled across that I kind of thought might better serve me now, this phase of my life. And I went to the JKD school, sat in there and watched, and they were doing the, someone throws a punch, you block it with this hand, block it with that hand, and then do some ridiculous back fist. And I was like, after boxing, it's hard enough to touch a hand once, let alone twice, unless they leave it out there. If they leave it out there all day. And so I'm like, it just doesn't work. Like this is nonsense. So then I went to the Krav place, and a lot of what the instructor said made sense. And it just so happened that he didn't live too far away from me. We got along really well. So I went and studied there for a number of years. And yeah, I kind of fell into it. And yeah, it was just convenient, and it was the closest thing. Like, I was into reality-based self-defense. I stumbled across some DVDs online, and I was like, whoa, this is the stuff. And Krav was probably the closest to it at the time. So yeah, it made me sort of jump in and have a go. And yeah, that was good.
So this will obviously be quite a bit of a jump, but I think that's where all the juice is at. So how did the disillusionment came about for you? And we spoke about that a bit between ourselves, but I don't think it's much on record. So
yeah, it's so basically, so once I became an instructor, and again, it just so happened that people got me to instruct. It wasn't my goal. I started to teach classes, and probably about a year to 18 months in, like, I was teaching strictly Krav Maga, like exactly how I was taught. And there were a couple of things, like you're saying about doubt, that I was like, yeah, and I'm like, no, trust the process. Like, it's proven, it's battle proven. So I went along with it, and 18 months in, like, the guys they were better fighters, but not as much as if you just went to a boxing gym and worked on 3 punches that whole time. And I was like, hang on a second. And I sort of started to look at the drills and things like that. And we did all the usual suspects that you'll see in a Krav class. And we trained them to the nth degree. I would dare say we trained them harder than everyone else. And then I put my own little twist on them when I saw things that weren't going too well. And being a basketball coach, I know a good training drill is one that the participant has to make decisions. So they have to read the situation and make a decision. The more decisions you can put in there, or the more options that make them read the situation, scenario, whatever, the better the drill and the better the player becomes. And I'm like, well, all these drills we're doing in Krav, it's predetermined. So it's going to be an ice pick defense. Like, I know that prior. But when we did open-ended drills where anything goes, this stuff failed. Like, they didn't do it. And there were some pretty high-level guys. Like, there were some really good guys in my group, and they weren't getting it to work. And it made me sit there and go, hang on a sec, and explore that. And that's when that was one of the big factors. There's a couple of factors. Another one pops up in the comments. You'll see people talk and make political assumptions from it. So I wanted to distance myself from that as well. But just basically in terms of, the drills and what was promised and what was delivered, I think were two different things. Not entirely. Like, there's a lot of good things about Krav, but I'm results driven. So I want those people to be able to defend against a dive, be able to do this, to be able to do these things, be able to fight, not be able to do Krav Maga, if that makes sense. Like, going back, another analogy I use is in another lifetime, I was a maths teacher for about 6 months. And in maths, over here, you get marks for your working out. So if you can write down how you get to this point, you get marks. Whereas in fighting, it doesn't matter how you get there. There is a more efficient way to get there. But if you get there in the end, problem solved. So if you turn to the back of the book and write down the answer, in fighting, why not? It's results driven. So that was the other thing. Like, we took the focus away from the process and made it more about the results. So rather than teach Krav Maga the process, we were teaching how to get these results. And yeah, we found that what we taught kind of started to drift away a little bit, to the point where, like, if you walked in from another school, which a lot of people did, it would be unrecognizable as Krav. And just, I guess, you know, the right thing to do was drop the name, I guess, essentially. Yeah.
I know a couple of people, including myself, who started questioning the practice, and usually the practitioners were still staying in that realm. Like, even like your friends, colleagues, they're not really happy about it. You're the first person that I know who directly who was a part of Krav Maga and decided to question it, lose the name. How did people around you who were involved in it respond?
It was more of a blow to me, because I had like $1,000 worth of shirts printed up in my cupboard, and banners and signage, and everyone knew me as Krav West, sort of thing. So rebranding, that was sort of big, but everyone understood. Like, everyone was good. I think for people to come and train with me, they generally do their research. They're not just people that walk past and go, "Oh, I'm going to try that school." It's people that have done their research, so they're all on the same page as me, 100%. So they were all awesome. So they did, yeah. But
What about
the other people along the line, I
right?
think, that are still Krav Maga, it's kind of funny. There's a lot of them that are going, "Yeah, I support you now," but I'm like, "You're what I was removing myself from." Like,
Yeah.
There's people that, and even on the comments, you look at the comments, there was a couple of Krav Maga organizations that are like, "Yeah, we do this," and I'm like, "Your organization's the worst one." Like, come on. But anyway.
What do you think happens in the minds of these people who are probably not really teaching good stuff, but they keep on doing it? Like, what do you think makes them push on and not question?
This industry is rife with a lot of disconnect. There are so many examples of disconnect in this industry that, 1 + 1 = 5. Like, it's not 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
All the claims and all the things that they state don't always end up to the answer. And this is widespread. Like, this isn't just this issue. It's what is one of the biggest issues in this industry, I think, is that, I listen to podcasts of various people, and there's people out there who are put on a pedestal. This guy's the best. He's written these books, and everyone must have them in their library. And I'm like, okay. And then I'll watch him train or see a video or the stuff that he's teaching, and I'm like, you didn't do what you just said. You couldn't. You don't have an athletic bone in your body, and yet you beat up those 6-7 people. Like, come on, you're a liar. So there's that element where, and there's also the element where what they say and what they do are two different things. There's a lot of things in this industry that are claimed as gospel, but if you look at them a lot deeper, they're actually not. And I can talk about the whole thing about telegraphing, but I won't, because that's for another day, about being non-telegraphic and that. Like, just watch fights, whether it be your top level boxers, MMA people, and watch it in slow motion. And there's always this, and then it comes forward that people are trying to eradicate. Why not do it more efficiently than trying to get rid? Like, there's a whole bunch of things like that. There's just so much of it where this doesn't equal this, and people fall in love with a notion, an idea, or I guess what they should be like. They fall in love with a particular individual, and they have that God complex where, they can't do anything wrong, they're infallible or whatever, without looking at it. And I say that to my guys all the time. Like, if you think what I'm saying is bullshit, like say it. Like I don't mind. And if you can show me a better way, show us. Like we're collectively getting better. All of us are here. You know, it's not about like my ego's in check that you can turn around and say to me that this is wrong. Like I'm not going to go, oh, you know, and arc up and get all upset. I'll go, well, show me why. Show me how to do it better, please. Like, so I know I'm drifting up in other directions.
Yeah, no, we're good. Yeah.
Yeah, like the disconnect. It's just like it's crazy. Like, just yeah, we need to be more objective. Like there's a big lack of objectivity in this industry where look at something, even if it belongs to you, even if it's something that you've done and your great grandfather gave it to you and passed it down to his son, you know, your dad who passed it on to you and you've perfected it for 20 years. If it's garbage, it's garbage. You know what I mean? Like we can't become emotionally attached to it if we want to advance. It's that simple. You know, but people get emotionally attached to people, to systems, to techniques, to all these various things, and you've got to let go. Like I just say to people, you know, you've got to learn to let go of things. There's still people, like there was a guy that used to teach karate, and he went down the path of reality-based self-defense, but it just looked like karate to me with, you know, maybe changed up a couple of things that they did, and it's like you're doing a shit impression of karate and a shit impression of reality based. Like take your foot out of that one completely if that's where you want to go, or go back to that one. Don't sit in the middle. Like you got to let go. You got to let go of one or the other. Like you can't be both. So yeah, it's just this industry, man. Stuff that I see and read, and the people who are successful quite often, I just think, how does this person pack out a hall? Are you people insane? And that used to really get to me. It used to bother me where I'd see people and they'd have, you know, twice as many students in their class, whereas now I just look at them and go, all these 20 people here are idiots. Like if you rate that higher than what I do, you're not smart enough to come and train with me. So I'm happy with the smart people that I have coming in.
That's a quality over quantity in a way, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why my guys will challenge instructors.
Yeah.
But I encourage it, but they're not scared to because I know they can go.
For sure.
They're awesome people. Yeah.
You reminded me of something I actually just kind of recently had this epiphany, like where things just, or what's called serendipity, this difficult word where things just came together. And I've been questioning publicly martial arts for the past 3-4 years. And so there's this collective experience which is happening, like comments, meeting people, talking about it. And I realized just lately that there's no single person that I know who quit. And I hate using the term questionable martial art, but I guess like traditional martial art doesn't work so much either. But some sort of practice where they doubted it and they quit it and moved on to some more alive practice. I don't know even, and I met like hundreds of these people. I don't even know one who regretted doing that. And that was like an interesting moment for me. I was like, whoa, that's such an interesting fact. Do you have a similar experience as well?
Like this whole sort of thing that we've been doing together, it makes me feel like I'm the Scientologist that's broken away and, you know, I'm telling everyone about it.
It's a bit like that though, at least for me.
But like the Krav wasn't sort of cultish, I guess. It was like, for us, it was a progression. So it was just a name and that's all it was. It was a label, but it didn't define who we were. It was just a label that sort of gave people an idea of what we did. It didn't define it as such. And that's where, for us, it was an easy transition because like we already had a foot out the door. Like we were just taking steps. And for me, out of loyalty to the people who, they were good to me and they were good people, I didn't want to turn around and rubbish them. And that's why I'm minding my P's and Q's right now when I'm speaking about this. But it was a gradual, I guess, defection, I guess, as such. Like, so, but yeah, there is a lot of people who still, you know, you just see it in the comments and things on these videos that are just cling to it. But it's like, have a look what's being said. Does it make sense? You know, that's what I ask you. Does it make sense? And if it does, and really look at it, like you got to look at this stuff objectively. Like that's the only way. I know. I totally destroyed your question there.
No, you're good. It's the same direction. You're good.
But yeah, like aside from that, like, yeah, we've had some people as well that have come in that have been the same. You know, they've done X martial art or whatever, and then it's just like an awakening. It's like, you know, they saw. I'm not going to say they saw, but they saw something that's changed their whole line of thought, and yeah, it's cool. But that rarely happens. Rarely, like people. It's like religion. Wherever you're born, you're probably going to be that religion. You know, same sort of, I guess. Yeah.
For sure, I think it's a very tough thing to do. Although I think more and more people get there, and or maybe that's just my experience. You know, we all live in a sort of a bubble. We meet the people around things we are interested in. But I'm also maybe thinking that hopefully the internet is helping out there, because like if you 5 years ago, if you typed in Aikido into YouTube search, you would get like these demos and some fancy videos. Then about a few years ago, I released the Aikido versus MMA video where I got, you know, beaten around by an MMA guy, and then other videos started popping up as well. And now you type in Aikido and you see Aikido guys, you know, being wiped, having themselves used as wiping up the floor or whatever, you know. So I think it's much harder now for people to even commit to doing Aikido, and I think that's one of the crises Aikido is having, and other practices too. Like you have this Chinese guy who goes around and kicks the ass of Tai Chi guys and Kung Fu guys. I think it's harder now to get into that and to maintain that illusion. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's see, back in the day, and this is where combat sports has a massive jump on martial arts reality based and things like that, because it's clear cut. You know, you go on Sherdog and you'll see people's MMA records. You could find videos on it online. Like, whereas years ago, there was like, I remember I've only got a couple of fight videos where I had a friend who had one of those old school video cameras that sat on your shoulder. Like, I was lucky enough to have a friend who had one of those. His dad had one.
Yeah.
He would bring it and put his big VCR in there and record it. So, and even prior to that, there was none of that going around. Like, events weren't even filmed. But these days, everything's on film in terms of combat sports. But in the reality base, like, people are just telling stories, and how do you know it's true? Like, the way I kind of try and determine whether it's true or not is I watch them train. And if you can't move in the manner that you state that you can, that says a lot to me. So you can tell me all the stories that when you were a prison guard that you beat up 5 prisoners and, you know, did all this and that, and then I watch your videos of you training or training people and what you're training them. I'm like, no, I've been in that realm. I've seen how it goes down. You're not surviving in that with 1, let alone 5. So to me, it just diminishes anything that they've said. So in the self-defense world, like these elaborate stories, I've had instructors that I've heard them change stories to suit the crowd, the same story, you know, and I'm just sitting there going, I've heard that a little bit differently, you know, not too long ago. And then it has a third sort of thing, and I'm like, wow, like what spins are you going to do it on at this time? Like it's, yeah. So in that perspective, today you can't really, it's hard to bullshit because, yeah, there's evidence.
Harder.
Yeah, it's still, yeah. But they still get away with it.
Yeah, I like that you're pointing to that dishonesty between people. And I think the question, which is interesting, I guess I'm thinking out loud now, but I think that one of the reasons I think we fail as human beings with this in many areas of life, like politics and medicine. Like, you know, there's basically, I'm bringing it down to a lack of critical thinking. And I think we're not taught to have critical thinking, and that kind of makes it natural that we choose practices which don't make sense. But there's a thing I like to distinguish: there's explanations and there's justifications, and traditional martial arts are packed with justifications. We justify why we do this. There's no real legit explanation with examples and empirical data. But then again, it's interesting because people just don't ask the question of, how do I know that what I believe in, what I claim is true? And most of it is anecdotal. Like, you know, you hear these stories of, oh, yeah, I know this works because one guy from our dojo defended himself against a knife. It's like, how do you really know? And it's interesting too, because, and I think that's where your practice brilliantly comes in, because some people, they're like, oh, our art is too dangerous to train, so we can't really, we know it works because it's too dangerous, but we can't train it. And I realized there's a simple answer, you know, get a full body armor,
Yeah.
you know, do some real practice, like really beat the hell out of each other, and you'll know. And when
Yeah.
I pitch that to some of those guys, they're like, they usually don't really, they haven't even thought about it before, which is interesting.
Yeah.
They're like, I
Yeah.
guess we could do it, and then they're kind of lost. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that whole thing?
It's essential. Like, if you're claiming to teach people to fight, to defend themselves, you don't have to necessarily do it. Like, for example, I don't get my kids' class to do that. I get my senior guys like Matt and people like that, like reality-based Matt, who never shies away from, any crazy scheme that I come up with. I go, Matt, or the other guys, why don't we try this? Yeah, like that. They sort of egg it on. And there has to be someone like that testing the stuff out, or you need to be affiliated with someone like that to know it's true. And there also needs to like be evidence to some degree. Um, a friend of mine went to a seminar recently where they were teaching, I think it was a knife defense thing, paid an obscene amount of money to go to this course. And he saw right through it and was like, this is really, really bad. And he was like, um, oh, this works. And he knew didn't work. He's like, oh, do you guys train it? He's like, yeah, I'll show you now. And he did the knife attack. Like, A, the guy knew what was coming. B, he probably did it at 60%. And so it's easy to get it to work under those conditions.
Yeah.
There needs to be somewhere where you can go, you know what, if you're really interested in seeing how you do this under pressure and it work under pressure, here's an example, or at least how you test it. Everyone talks about pressure testing. It's one of those things that really annoys me. Like, we pressure test everything. Well, yeah, actually you do, but there are degrees of pressure. And if you're not training at a, 8, 9 out of 10 intensity, that's not really pressure testing. Like,
Right.
it is, a 2 out of 10 is pressure. It's just really light pressure. So, like that's one of the things. Someone needs to be doing it, or you need to be affiliated with someone that's doing it. And there's only a few people worldwide that put out material that do that. Like, and not many people do it because it doesn't look good. Like, it looks ugly. Like, I keep referring back to, we had this knife day where we did this, and I've probably mentioned it before, where we put the person in a hole, not literally, but we made them start in the corner of our padded room with their head in the corner of the wall. Another person was outside and they had these texter, these markers, and they would open the door. When that other person had heard the door shut, they could then turn around. When they had their back to the wall, I'd manipulate the room somehow. So I might put a broom down, a chair. We had all this movable furniture. I might sneak in there and take this furniture out so it's a big wide open space. So like, we had this set criteria, and it was a points-based system. So the people who were coming in to stab them wanted to actually stab them because it served them better in the long run for killing those people. And then if they survived, they had a chance of winning. So we actually gave them an incentive to try and stab that person. So they would come in, and we also took away any, I guess, restrictions. Not any restrictions, but you could punch, you could do anything. You could come out with a jab and use that as your rear hand. You could kick them and then try and stab them, tackle them and stab them. And we took it to that place, and we finished it. And at the end of it, like, we were trying everything, like, and it's just such a hard thing to deal with. And I walked away from it going, wow, like, we really need to improve it. But that wasn't a reflection on us. That's a reflection of the activity in general, because I haven't seen anyone train it to that level. And then I had these people going, oh, your guys aren't that good. Like, I'm like, okay, well, please show me a video of you guys doing it. I'm keen to learn. And then they gave me the most pathetic video where the guy's stabbing at 50%. I was like, mate, like, come on. And he's like, oh, no. My guys are really well trained. They can't come in aggressively stabbing like they're, and I'm like, so training makes you worse at this stuff? Like, disconnect. There it is again.
Yeah.
Like, I just, you got to take it to that level. Like, it's not real. And this is one of the challenges I have as an instructor is, we all talk about the adrenaline dump, and basically the person who's defending needs to have a little bit of fear in them. They need to be scared. There needs to be a little bit of anxiety. Otherwise, it's pointless. Because I guarantee you, every single one of the guys, just about, if someone jumped out at them, while they're in ATM, there'd be fear involved. So that changes it significantly. And I talk about how the more emotion that's added, as in fear, aggression, whatever, it changes your response. So if you're overly angry, overly scared, how you're going to fight is not how you would do it in sparring boxing, because for the most part, when you're sparring boxing, you're not in that same mindset or that frame of mind. So again, it looks like drunken pub brawling, and it happens to everyone. Like my favorite internet video, one of them is there's a kung fu guy and the taekwondo guy who start off and for about 2.5, 3 seconds are doing martial arts, and then as soon as one of them gets hit, they both start windmilling, and it looks horrible. I love that video because that sums up to a T. You look at the videos of fights that break out at press conferences,
Yeah.
you know, or even in fights, you know, at the end of MMA matches where they're doing all this cool stuff, and then they get into a fight after, and it looks nothing like what they were doing 5 minutes before. Or, you know, even the Khabib running and jumping into the crowd. There was one at a judo tournament recently that did the rounds where there was an all-in brawl, and everyone's just windmilling. No one's judoing each other. Where did the judo go when you needed it? And that's where, again, when we talk about the context, like boxing works, it thrives in that. A lot of the other stuff doesn't. You know, that's where, boxing and things like that have such relevance. It's like you can box in a drunken pub brawl. You know, it doesn't take much thought. You can do it instinctively. When you're scared, when you're angry, you'll still be throwing them punches. And our theme, or the way that we train, is rather than go, no, stop. That's hopeless. Like, it's like, no, we guide that. And our last little fight tournament that we have every year, we have these 20-second fights where it's anything goes.
Wow.
I kind of like style it. Like, everyone's padded up, but it hurts. And to make it look cool, I do add the cool element where I get, you know, an athletic starter's gun and, you know, start. And then they fight. And then to stop it, I fire it again, bit of drama. But we put it in all these different settings. And when we do that, like, what appears is very different to what happens, like, in regular sparring. Like, it just, everything changes. And like this year when we did that, there are a couple of guys who are well trained and never do this in training. They just grab the back of each other's heads and they're just sitting there hitting each other. Can't see my hand. Yeah, just hitting each other. And that happened in several fights. And I was like, we're not going to sit there and go, stop grabbing each other by the back of the head and hitting. How about we put some method behind that madness? How about we stylize it a little bit? Not stylize it, but make it more fun. You know, add a little bit of skill to it so that while you're hitting them, you're actually defending yourself somewhat, or a couple of moves to, you know, so we run with it, you know, we don't try and stop it, sort of thing, you know, like human reaction, human instincts. We can't change them for the most part.
For sure. Yeah, there's at least two really I find important parts that you brought up, and there's one I wanted to backtrack to, is the intensity. And I think I actually I like to say stole that, you know, great artists steal. So I stole that from you and in line from Matt. I think probably he learned it from you, to be fair, and he brought it up in a video and then you spoke about it. But basically, that the 10% of intensity, that it can make a huge difference. And yeah, I was looking, there's this video from Matt where, again, I think probably he's inspired from what you teach, but he looked at the Gracie self-defense stuff and he was able to apply that under some pressure, where like random street people were like, you know, they were politely trying to stab him, and that's kind of alive. But I really like your point that you can make so much more, the percentage of what stuff you can make happen in that intensity versus up that 10%, with each 10%, like probably like 90% of the techniques just go out of the window, right?
Yeah. Even though it's not, you know, quantifiable, I would really like, you know, maybe Matt can do it, a video where two people spar at, you know, 50%, then maybe they go 60, you know, 70, 80, 100, and then just compare the techniques. And you'll find what's happening up here is different to, like, if it's happening here, it can happen here, absolutely. But it'll be different. It'll be totally different. And the up here is our King of the West stuff. Like, when we do that, that was one of the real eye openers. Like, there was no 360-degree defense, a simultaneous block and strike. It was like, it was brawling. And so you know, we run with it. Like, it is what it is. You know, we're not going to bypass that. we've tried to bypass it, but every time we turn up the heat, that's what seems to come out. So how about we just get better at that?
Yeah. 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 And I think that brings me to the other point, the brilliant point you made. And it's something I was exposed to myself as well. And I thought about, and I found it brilliant that when, like, that example of UFC press conferences where suddenly they start to fight each other. It looks so different.
Yeah.
And I'm almost thinking out loud here, like this new thought is occurring when I'm comparing those two subjects, the intensity versus fighting slash brawling. I'm thinking, and I'm wondering if you agree with this processing of my thought, that when people are, let's say, in the cage, especially professional fighters, they're not going 100%
No.
out. Like there's, they're holding back, they're calculating, like the emotional level, especially like the top level guys, they can really like be in tune with what's happening. But then you mentioned Khabib getting pissed off and he jumps out and he looks like, a gorilla. It's like, I think when you add the real intensity, that's what's going to happen in a real life situation. Like you're not prepared for this. You haven't you weren't thinking about this for 3 months, and then suddenly there's all these emotions. There's real danger, life threatening. So I think that just changes the game completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is that we need to remember as well is those trained fighters, that's not that emotional for them, or as emotional. So if you or I had to jump in the cage against Khabib, like, I would be going to the toilet every 5 minutes. I would get into the cage like this, where someone else who wants to fight him, they're not like that. They're controlled. Their emotions aren't as heightened as yours and mine would be.
Right.
So from that perspective, the more heightened, and I did this like chart where emotion, and when I say emotion, it could be aggression, fear, and any number of things. When you put that in, the amount of techniques, the more emotion that's involved, the less techniques that appear. So I've done this video, this like chart, and the exception to that rule is, you get some people that fight all the time, and it's not an emotional thing to them. They just have a couple of beers at the pub, and soccer hooligans or things like you find in the UK who like to punch on. It's not emotional for them, so that they'll be in somewhat control under those circumstances. People who like trained fighters would be that way. Trained, I guess, criminals who it's their job to go around and harm people. To them, it'd be no big deal. Having said that, though, I interviewed one, and he said that my friend interviewed him. He said that every time he had to go, he was an enforcer. So every time he had to go bash someone, stab someone, or whatever, he would take a hit of ice to take away that fear and that emotion. So, I mean, there's instances like that where those people will be somewhat more in control than what the average person is. And if you take the average, I don't know, accountant, for example, someone screaming at him could make him, totally terrified. So what he could get to work is really different. There's a scale of all this stuff. It's just, it's worth exploring, I think.
For sure. I think we'll be opening up to questions in a moment, but I have one more before we do that. So I find from looking at the comments and videos online that Krav Maga is very popular. And so, two-part question. Would you agree with that? And if yes, why? Why is it popular? I mean,
yes and no. In Australia, not so much, I would say. But there'd be people out here who would disagree with me. It's more popular because of J-Lo. I mean, she did it in a movie. What more validation do you need? From Jennifer Lopez, Krav Magaing people. So it is and it isn't. Like, I think it's really popular in the States and other countries. In Australia, yeah, it is somewhat popular. I don't think it'd be at the top of the list of most popular arts or things like that. Why do I think it is? I think it's marketed well. I think the average consumer out there who doesn't do their research will just say Israeli military, it's a military martial art.
Yeah.
That's, you can't get any better than that, which I think is somewhat incorrect. I think there's that. And just some of the claims, like, did I fall for it? Perhaps. But yeah, I fell for it. I'll say that I did. I wasn't seduced by the camo. I'll say that. It was more it was the claims of it being such a fast, devastating art for self-defense. That's kind of what I was looking for at the time. But yeah, it does. Like, just, I mean, it'd have to be popular looking at the number of views and comments and things like that. Probably suggest that it is. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's a good stepping stone into something. Like, it's a good starting point, I think, into the reality realm. It's a good first step to introduce people and to get them thinking along those lines.
Mm. So I guess if I would ask a yes or no question, Krav Maga disappears off the face of Earth, or it's crappy but it stays. If you'd be forced to choose one of the two, probably you'd say it's better that it stays, or what do you say?
Yeah, I think there's a place for it. I think if someone does come from another background where they've done combat sports and various other things, and like I said, just need that tweaked a little bit. If that person is a bit more free thinking and comes in and listens to what they say and go and doesn't change their footwork, doesn't change various things, but maybe looks at some of the weapon threat defenses and various things and the concepts involved in multiple attackers and things like that, I think it could assist them. So, I don't rank it as one of the worst ones out there. I still put it, I wouldn't say at the very top, but it's certainly in the upper half. It's in the upper three quarters. Like, it's better than a hell of a lot that's out there. Like, I'm not gonna. I still, there's still a place in my heart for it. I'll be honest. I still think there is a lot of validity in it. Yeah, I think it's good.
So I was about to open it up for everyone's questions, and just to remind everyone who's watching, you can start writing those questions in the live chat. We'll be covering them soon enough. Primarily, I would encourage everyone to drive their questions to Jeff. I can chip in as well, but Jeff is the guest, and he's been through it all: combat sports, self-defense, Krav Maga. So there's a lot you can ask. So use the opportunity, be smart. But before we open up the questions, I actually remembered one more, which I really wanted to ask you. So in the video I made featuring you, I didn't see that angle coming myself. When I started to write my own analysis, that it came up is the comparison between Aikido and Krav Maga, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting that occurred to me. What about yourself? Did you ever see any similarities between the two?
Someone in the comments said it's something about Wing Chun.
Yeah,
and a lot of the stuff, like, I had a friend who was pretty heavily into Wing Chun. He showed me some stuff, and I was like, I used to say to him, like, this is like Wing Chun on wheels, like you're moving, you're doing it in motion. And all arts are guilty of that. I throw a punch and I leave my hand out. So, all arts, like, none of them, for the most part, are immune to it. Like, there's a lot of BJJ videos out there. I'm sorry to upset you because I know that has a dear place in your heart. But there's a video, a BJJ one, where they're showing you how to defend 6 chokes you should know in a car or something. And it's almost like the attacker fell asleep on the girl and allowed him to stay. Like, he's not doing anything. And I'm like, you're doing exactly what you criticize other people, leaving your arms out. You're not really addressing that. You're doing just the same. You're doing exactly the same that you criticize other people about, which again is another big part about this industry. You're not allowed to criticize other people's, what they do, or you're considered a hater. But that depends who you are, because a lot of the haters out there throw that shade at other people themselves, and then when other people, like, it's almost like you can say it to this person, but you can't say it to this person. They pick and choose. But yeah, like, all arts are guilty of that. Your Aikido videos where your arm freezes. A lot of those Krav Maga videos where the arm freezes. Like, it's almost it's something that's in all arts almost. Like, it happens a lot. Or you'll see, oh, this is how I'll do this ankle lock, and they'll roll around the guy's ankle, and the guy's just standing still, and I'm thinking, move your leg, just move your leg. That's all you got to do, and they don't. So they're all guilty of it. So there are similarities in all of it, I guess. Like, martial arts in general have that flaw that there's a lot of deception, there's a lot of trickery, there's a lot of, I've seen it in demos. Like, I mean, just the fact that martial arts shops sell re-breakable boards, you're not exactly breaking a board now, are you, if you're hitting one that's designed to crack? So you see those ice-breaking things where they you know, I've heard they put salt and stuff on it, and there's like, they're not stacked like that. There's a gap so that when this one cracks, that hits it, and so forth. There's a lot of trickery. You can hit a pad a certain way. I remember watching a karate demo where a guy was holding a kick shield, and the guy hit the top corner of it because it, you know, it made the guy sort of move back, and everyone oohed and ahed. And then those instructors that, you know, hit live people, they do the demos and they hit these people in the head really, really hard as a demo. And I'm like, man, I could get a girl from, no, I shouldn't say girl. Girls are just as powerful as boys quite often. I could get a young boy from my kids' class who's 6 years old, and I wouldn't let him hit me in the head as hard as he could. He's going to hurt, regardless of who it is, if they're not fighting back. So there's all this stuff that people do for showmanship, stomp their feet. You know, Krav Maga is really good with the you know, shouting over the sounds of the hitting makes it sound more devastating, and the look around aggressive mannerisms. And it's like that was one thing I didn't like. There's some dodgy videos where people do all that and then they're, you know, looking around, and I just yeah, like, maybe it's, you know, I'm getting old, my neck can't like it used to, but just all that stuff. There's so much trickery involved in all martial arts that it's why, like, I try and push people down the path of just be honest. Like, and like, if like, I respect what you've done about with your Aikido and that, like, it's huge. Like, to walk away from something that you devoted your life to and it was your livelihood, that's massive. Like, that's, you know, kudos to you for doing that. Like, it's huge.
Thank you. Well, at least I didn't have 1,000 T-shirts printed.
Yeah. Oh. Still using them. I use them in my kids' classes. I'm going to. Yeah.
But thank you. Well, actually, you just brought me to a couple of points too, and I'll actually connect them. So one is, I'm thinking out loud. You're making me think, which is stuff I love. But you know, when you leave that hand out, or a person is standing, there's so much more you can do. Like we spoke about that intensity. When the intensity is lacking, there's so much more fancy stuff and cool looking stuff and kind of elaborate, complicated stuff you can do, which probably people love. You know, people love new stuff, shiny stuff. I think it's in our nature. And I think I'm totally with you. I love BJJ, but I'm still planning to make a video trashing it a bit myself. And even I'm concerned how BJJ people will take it, because I think they're quite level-headed often, but I don't think they're always receptive to getting crap, you know, for the practice themselves. Yeah. But the thing is that I'm looking at is the self-defense versions they usually present. Yes. Like, and it's such an interesting dissonance that, you know, BJJ on its own, there's the whole sports versus reality question and so on, but I think it's not as major as just the question that when they roll, you know, they're really trying to get each other. But when it comes to self-defense, suddenly it's like, it's the same like any other crappy martial art. It's like, I punch, I stop, and you do some fancy technique on me. I'm like, where's the pressure testing, which is BJJ is known for here?
Yeah. And that's where, in a sense that, you know, everyone needs to stay in their lane, so to speak, somewhat. Yeah. And sometimes people get that a bit skewed. You know, I'm the first one. If someone pulls out a pistol or, you know, wants to do room clearing and that, I'm like, nah, there's better people out there than that. You know, that's not my forte. I don't do any of that stuff. I stick to, like, I'm just the empty hand guy. That's it. Like, you fight with what you got on you, sort of thing. And it's you know, like, people say that everything has something to offer, and I disagree.
Me too.
And going back to that stuff, like, people are probably considering me a hater now if I start to sort of rag on some people. Sorry, it's Australian lingo. But, you know, in any other profession, like, right now my fridge is not working. It just stopped, like, right before. And, you know, if I called someone out and he got gaffer tape and wrapped it around the fridge and said, yep, it's right, and I know that doesn't work, I'm allowed to call out and say, hey, come back here. I'm not paying you. Let's fix that. But in the martial arts world, it's totally fine. You know, it's why can't you call stuff out? Like, and if you stand by your product and stand by what you do, then it should be open to scrutiny. You know, it's that's the way I see it anyway.
For sure. Yeah, and I love your point of staying on your lane. I think that's the difference between crappy and suspicious practices versus good practices. Like I think any good professional, and again, I think it's just human beings are guilty of that. Like the
Yeah.
less the person knows, the more they'll be like, oh, I'm a YouTube expert and I'm an Instagram expert and a marketing expert. It's like, and I'm speaking of that because I dabble in YouTube, and I'm like, I know that I have no clue about Instagram. I could make some guesses, but it's like they're two different platforms. And I think that's what makes a professional. But in martial arts, and I say that Aikido is very guilty of that, because it's like we have staff and sword and knife and these elaborate falls and techniques. It's like trying to be so many things. And I just realized I think Krav Maga has that challenge too. It's like we have also firearms and knives and multiple attackers. So yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where years ago I did a video and I was talking about units of time. And I cringe at the video now, but I've left it there. People can laugh at me, where I had units of time and I had these cups and they all represented something different. So one could be ground, one could be stand up, clinch, knife defense, multiple attackers, and it continues. And if you do boxing, it's one cup, so you can put all your time into it, so you get really efficient at that.
Yeah.
And when MMA first came out, I'd watch MMA fights and go, that was really shitty kickboxing. But now in hindsight, it's like, well, they're dividing it between three things. They're dividing it between their stand-up, their clinch, and then their ground. So, of course, it's not going to be good as the person who specializes. Then when you get to, Krav and various other things, then you've got multiple attackers. You've got weapon threats. You've got, you keep adding to the equation, multiple attackers. And then you can add two of these together. What if you've got multiple attackers with weapons? What if you've got, and then so it just creates all this thing where your unit of time is spread thinly across them all. And if you're spreading that thinly across everything, you won't be good at anything. And so that's where, like, when people ask me, and I saw a lot of the questions, they say, what's a good starting point for self-defense? Go to boxing. Like, it's 3 punches. And the person who can do it the fastest, hardest, at the right times and things like that is the best. And that's how it should be.
True. Okay, I'm finally ready to open up to questions. Are you still good on time for like at least 20 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, no, it's like midnight, so sorry about that.
Right, it's Saturday night here, so
okay,
I don't have anything.
Cool. So before I look at direct questions, I wanted to bring up Pablo Emmanuel Cavalsanti de Sales. I hope I pronounced it right. Just use the super chat, which I always am really appreciative of. He says, thanks to both of you for such great work and bringing great content to YouTube. Thank you, Pablo, for the support. He also became a member. This is a new thing, but I'll talk about it in a different video. So that's not a question, that I just wanted to celebrate that, and thank you for that.
You can understand me, so that's good.
Sorry?
You can understand me, so that's good. That's
So far, I didn't see even one comment who would complain about not understanding. Maybe they're being polite. No, I'm just joking. Anyway, so I saw one, and I'm backtracking, and so it's interesting because you introduced me to, like, at least theoretically, to Mick Coop, and I know about Tony Bauer. So, but let's start with you. So, what are your thoughts on Mick Coop and Tony Bauer?
So anyone who knows anything that I do, I rate Mick Coop as the king of combatives. I've trained with a few of the people that are considered leading authorities in the world. He's by far and above the best one. His material is just on another level. A lot of this free thinking and ideas and things, he kind of pushed me in that direction. So like, nothing but good things to say. And if you get the opportunity, go train with him, 100%. Like, yeah, definitely. Tony Blair, I don't know too much about. I know what he does. How do I say this nicely? I haven't heard the nicest of things when people talk about him, but my own personal experience with him, I haven't had anything to do with him. So, yeah, I won't comment. Yeah.
So I'm still yet to, personally, to continue on from you, still yet to get to know more of Mick Coop's work, but I'm hearing you saying such good things about him, so I'm starting to become super enthusiastic. Tony Blauer, I haven't spoken to him personally, but I've went through his certified instructor's course, which I really liked, and there's a lot of quotes I use from Tony, and I admire him as a person. I wouldn't say like I'm a complete fanboy. Sometimes I see some places where I'm a bit cautious, and I think that's one of the reasons why I did not promote myself as a spear instructor through the rest of the time. But I don't have like a list of specific examples of this is bad, this is bad. So there's pros and cons as everywhere. But in general, I really like what Tony is bringing to the table. I think he's definitely worth checking out. There's one thing I quickly want to cover. So Alan's Raptor is saying not all traditional martial arts. He means, are fucking up basically. Why constantly push that sort of narrative? That's on me. Many people blame me for that, and I just want to make a point because many people get confused about that. It's hard to find a better term, and it's even like some people don't even know. Like, we don't have a clear definition for traditional martial arts. The way I define traditional martial arts is martial arts which heavily invest in tradition, thus traditional martial arts, meaning they most likely will have techniques which are not pressure tested, which are ancient, and big chance that they will not be very effective. It doesn't mean all of them are like that, but that's my train of thought. I'm not trying to say all of them. I just don't have, it's a lack of a better term. But I don't know, Jeff, do you have anything to add to the use of traditional martial arts and bashing onto them?
Good exercise. Gee, when I'm 80, if I'm still around, I'll probably get into it. Yeah, so I'm not going to dismiss it, but
yeah. Sorry. Well, actually, that wants me to ask you, and this is a kind of a big question, but there's some people who, and I'm kind of going to a binary mindset, but there's some people who say that it's better to train traditional martial arts than nothing, and there's other people who say no, actually, some traditional martial arts like Aikido, you train to condition yourself so specifically that actually that will make you freeze or respond inefficiently to an attack, that you're better off untrained than heavily trained in a traditional martial art. So which side do you lean on to?
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I had like, I'll use my daughter as an example, who's 7 now. When she was a baby and we'd play fight, she'd sit there and she'd tear strips off my face and that, and I'd sit there and go, what she does is pretty effective. I probably shouldn't teach her anything. I probably shouldn't detrain any of this stuff, because what she's doing hurts me, and she was like 1 or 2 or whatever at the time. So it's interesting. Yeah. Like, is it doing more harm than good? It depends. Like, if the art is physical, so, if it's a karate where you're doing heaps of push-ups and running and sit-ups and that, anything that makes you a better athlete, fitter, faster, stronger, can have positive effects, I think.
Okay, but it's like there's a question mark there in a way.
Yeah.
So MZ Info is asking, what do you think of David Kahn's Krav Maga? So I do not know if that person, clearly a question for you, Philip.
I don't know either.
No, never met him. Okay, I think there's people. I saw him in my comments. Like, some people are like, David Kahn. So I guess he's out there on YouTube, but you haven't.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Pumpleblood is asking, Jeff, are you familiar with the work of Ian Abernethy? If so, what do you think of his approach? Is it realistic?
I've seen little bits and pieces of it. Not a great deal. Probably not enough to comment, to be honest. Like, to me, I'd have to see more. So I would just say, I'm sitting on the fence on that one. I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I can jump in because I'm friends with Ian. Obviously, that maybe makes me a bit biased, but at the same time, I wouldn't be friends with him if I wouldn't think his stuff is good.
Yeah.
So I like a lot what he's doing. The martial map. Have you ever seen his martial map, Jeff?
No.
It's like a pretty cool idea that it's a Venn diagram where there's martial arts, there's self preservation or something like that, or personal security, and then there's fighting, and they correlate, they meet, but they're also different fields, and he's the one who opened my mind to realizing that, oh, those are 3 different things. So I personally like him, and I was in a seminar of his. He's also a student of Peter Karnsterdine, who's really like an all-out expert. He has a security company and protects people in hotspots. So I would vouch for Ian, to say some. So I didn't have a chance to see if that's a good question or not, but let's see. James of the Voiceless Dragon It's a good name from parents. What is 100%? In a post-UFC fight brawl, is it all out? How many of those fights did they actually want to risk killing the other person versus someone in a bar who lost it and grabs a broken bottle? Any thoughts about that? It's kind of a lot packed in there. Let's see.
If I'm clutching at straws here, I'll say that, if there was a bottle next to Khabib, would he have picked it up and thrown that in that moment at Conor McGregor? Maybe. I mean, Conor McGregor has thrown glasses across pub at other people. I've seen that in the past. Maybe there was nothing around at the time. When I say 100% is you're actually trying to hurt the person. So with maybe what's around you. When we train at that, we never train at 100% because there's always rules like you can't pick someone up, drop them head first in the ground and break their neck or you know that kind of thing. So we never get it to 100. You're actually fully in the moment trying to do everything you can to destroy them. There's no thought going on but other than, destroy, I guess. You're just trying to hurt that person and whatever's around. Like I've seen it many times where people have picked things up and hit people with it and with them. And yeah, a lot of that stuff sort of just happens. It's instinctive.
I think that's good enough. It's a bit of a stacked question, so and more presuming than asking. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just feeling a bit not too sharp. I can't answer a lot of these questions.
No. That question was just a complicated way of asking. So, next question, Jeff. You were saying about how when the emotion ramps up, technique ramps down. Does this mean that the technique might work at 100%, but being human, you just can't get there, or the technique is bullshit? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to sort of look at it. Technique might work at 100%. I think it's a little bit individualistic in that some people may be able to get it to work because they're not at 100, whereas others in that certain circumstance, they'll be at 100. Like, I know I've been in fights where I've done things that I didn't think I would do. It's just you go into autopilot and stuff just happens. It's some of the stuff's good, some of it's bad. Just trying to think does this mean that it might work at 100%? And sometimes being human doesn't allow you under those conditions. A lot of people, when they talk about adrenaline, they say that it affects your cognitive processes, so your thoughts and things like that. So perhaps that's like an afterthought. It's not something that would pop up in the moment to think about it. So, I'm not sure if I'd necessarily say it's BS, but maybe in that moment that you're that emotionally charged, it just doesn't pop in your head, perhaps.
Yeah. There's something that this question and what you spoke makes me think, and I don't think it's like a clear-cut direct answer, but I think it's a worthy notion that, and something I thought about, that there may be some superhuman beings, like super highly trained, very like freaks of nature who can pull off one of those techniques out of like a movie. But then the question is, do you really want to focus? It's like training 90% of the time something that only works 1% of the time, versus training 90% of the time something that works 90% of the time, if there's such a thing. Probably it's lower, but I think like that's like if somebody is able to pull something off who's super athletic, etc. I don't personally think that necessarily makes it less BS. It's just the question is not whether it's BS or not. For me, whether it makes sense to train it.
Yeah, like whether it's a high percentage, like we like to train high percentage things, and if it's not high percentage, then why spend time? I know you can spend time on it for arts and for all of that sake, but if your goal is purely self-defense, like just work on the high percentage stuff, like not something that you might get to work on the stuff that you will more than likely get to work. Talking about Mick Cooper, he says this thing about if something works, some of the time in training, it will work. It will never work in reality. If it works, sometimes it will work rarely in reality. And I'm butchering this, and if it works, all the time in training, it will work frequently. Like he says something along those lines, but it filters down. So
Yeah.
again, high percentage stuff is where your
Yeah.
focus would be if that's your goal.
Yeah, something that what you just said made me think of as well is, sorry?
I just butchered that. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I got it. Yeah, I think, yeah, there's one thing I disliked coming out from, again, I'll say traditional martial art, uh, is that in my practice, many times, like Wing Chun, Aikido, karate, I was told like, oh, this works and it works like this and it doesn't work like that. And they were like super specific, very, very demanding, like, okay, the wrist has to be like this and not like that. But when I moved to combat sports, the thing I loved was that I was never told this does not work, period. But I would be told, well, this is probably not a high percentage, but they would know that there's like any crazy thing can work out. But it's
Yeah.
like, but still, there's this assessment whether it's really worth investing your time in.
Yeah. Like we had a guy who he went to another Krav Maga school, and there's the block. There's this one move. Actually, there's a move where someone holds a knife to you like that, and you grab hold of it and you turn around. And he said he couldn't get it to work at this other school, and they were yelling at him, going, "You're doing it wrong." And then he came to us and do it. But the reason he couldn't do it was he was significantly taller than the person who had their arm around him. And I was like, well, okay, it works under these conditions. However, you're stuck in this situation where the person is shorter than you. So you have to modify it by doing this. So you need counters to, if they do this, then you do that. Like, and that's one thing about BJJ I really like, is that he moves that way, you move that way to set up this, and it just keeps, overlapping. And we should have that with everything we do.
Yeah. Uh, I think this will be a question, a good one for you. So just another comment says, what are your thoughts on having some sort of a standardized rule set or system that would allow some kind of inter-school club Krav Maga tournament? Will this be too much like some other sport?
Good question. I've seen this happen before. I've heard they do it in the IDF, but with what I've seen and the footage I've seen from the IDF and these other associations, so basically they have, they go through all the pistol disarms and that and see who does it the best, and maybe there's a marking criteria where they, you get points. And then when it comes to their sparring rounds, they wear those puffy jackets. I don't know if you've seen those big bulky things that just get in the way more so than anything.
Yeah, yeah.
So they wear those. They wear 16-ounce gloves, shin pads, the full face helmets. But the rules are you can only punch and kick to the body and maybe the legs. And so it looks like heavily padded Kyokushin karate tournaments. So it's lesser than the karate tournaments. And this is one of the points of difference I had with one of my Krav Maga people that I was involved with. I was like, well, we're training self-defense and you're omitting punching to the head, which is probably 9 out of 10 times what happens. You're taking out the biggest part. So it is tough to do. Like we do something similar where we have our little fight day, but even that, because we have those 20-second all-out fights, and it's really hard to judge. Like Matt got to the final this year, and he had to repeat the final 4 or 5 times. No, that's probably too many. Probably about 4 times, because they were neck and neck, and it was so hard to work out who was a winner. Like one guy took Matt down really well, but then just as the buzzer, the last 5 seconds, Matt reversed him and got on top and was about to hit, and then the buzzer sounded, and we were like, well, the takedown, if in an MMA fight, would have won it for him, but Matt, had it been a fight and allowed to continue, he was going to and so we called it a draw. Like it's really hard to do, but you can. Like our knife day and things like that, you can sort of do it that way. We have a couple of other schools that come out and do things like that with us. That are, it's really great to have them on board, and it's good too, because when it comes to, I guess, the adrenaline stuff, if you keep training with the same person every single day or the same group of people, like it takes away all the adrenaline. So you're not scared of them. You're like, okay, using a couple of people. I'm up against Kyle today. I know what Kyle does. Kyle likes to do this. Or I'm up against Ben and he does this. And so everyone gets comfortable with each other. And having these strangers walk in, it elevates the anxiety a little bit. And like it's good in that perspective. But it's really hard to score, because the knife thing, like everyone just about, there was one guy, George, who won our last knife day, and he's just a big guy who he did really well on the day. it was really hard to score. He was the only one, I think, out of 5 attacks. I think he stopped 3, and that was the best. So it's kind of tough to score. And we had another knife day where we finished it, and we were judging by like drawings on the shirts where they got the texture, and then we just got the shirts, and like some were slashes. Do they count as much? And then the guy actually won it. In hindsight, we went back and looked at it, and he had all these dots in the top of his head on his helmet. And the guy who was judging with me, Aaron, I'm dropping these names so they just make sure they're watching. He was like, I know all those shots were in the top of the skull. It wouldn't have done that much damage. But then after I spoke to the other guy, he was like, yeah, I would have been sticking it in his face, but I didn't want to hurt him. So I was just doing it. So it's really hard to judge this stuff. It's really hard, but it's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Cool. Alex is asking, what are your thoughts on belts in Krav Maga? I know there's several schools who use them.
We do something different. Like we used to, back when we were Krav Maga, we had different color T-shirts. It's cool because it gives people, like, number one, you walk into the room and we have so many people who want to be a coach and people telling people what to do. And we have this rule, so it sets aside you have to be this standard before you give advice to anyone, because there's people giving advice that shouldn't be. So number one, it's good in that respect. It's good to see who's in the school and who's done what. So, quite often people will come in and I'll see a couple of guys that are, really impressive. And because there's, like, if there's no belt system, they can't go, oh, he's a black belt. Like it's a little bit daunting. So I think, like, we have gradings. We do it differently now, whereby we have modules that we complete. So it could be a knife module where you cover the theory and you have to practice it for X amount of hours, and then you get tested. So the knife module is like that knife test. You're in the room and all these people are coming in trying to stab you, and you've got to survive a certain number of times. But they get a little patch that says, they've completed the knife one, they've completed that. And that allows them to, if we're in a class, someone can look at it and go, oh, you've done the knife module, can you help me with this? And so it's good in that respect. I think it's good. It gives people motivation. Like my kids' classes, how many kids go, oh, is it grading this week? I want to go for my X shirt or my this shirt or my that shirt. And it's kind of cool, keeps people motivated. There's not too many people out there in the world who train just for the sake of training. You need a light at the end of this tunnel. You need a goal. And that's a goal, and that's not a bad goal to have.
Yeah, that reminds me when I used to run my Aikido dojo, especially when I started to question it, I would really ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Because there's so many things you just do it because you were taught so. And one of those things was lining up based on hierarchy. The black belts are on the right, the new belts are on the left, and the new person comes in and I'm like, I'm supposed to tell them sit on the left. And I'm feeling like crappy to do it. I'm like, this person just came in and we're already like kind of making him feel like shit. He already doesn't feel comfortable being here. And now we're like, yeah, you're a loser. Sit there. I'm like, how do I explain why? It's like, well, because they do it in Japan. That's kind of a lousy answer. So eventually I came to a similar one, like you said. I was like, yeah, don't think about this. You're sitting on left. Just the best way to see it is you can look at the right and see who's most experienced. So you can jump to those people and say like, oh yeah, let's train together. They're gonna help you out. I was kind of pulling that narrative, although I still I'm not a fan of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I also liked a lot that you said. If I understood that correctly, you're almost forbidding the newer people to give advice.
We get some people there that coach others, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, that's the opposite of what I would tell you to do. And it happens a lot. Like, it's a goal of a lot of people's to become an instructor, and after being there, it's not that lucrative. It's not all it's cracked up to be. There's a lot of thought and effort and hard work and stuff that goes into it. If I put those hours into a second job, I'd probably have a much nicer car sitting in that driveway out there than what I do. But yeah, it is what it is.
That's the part I used to hate. I still hate. I think because that was a lot. Something that was happening a lot in Aikido. Like everyone is teaching everyone, and I used to hate. Like I'm a black belt. I come into a big seminar, and this white belt is like, "Oh no, you're doing this wrong." I'm like, who the hell do you think you are? And that's where I missed sparring, because in BJJ, and sometimes that would happen too. Like somebody would be, like a white
Yeah,
belt this time trying to tell me you're doing this wrong. I'm like, sure, yeah, but let's wait for the sparring. Let's roll, and then we'll see who's right. It's like
yeah,
there's this place where you can really test each other, but when there's no testing, oh, it's just like everyone thinks they're the master. I hate that. I really hate that. So I'm happy that you kind of removed that.
yeah.
That's
And that's the thing too. Like I don't believe in. I don't make people like. I've never liked people coming in bowing or. I just kept telling them to call me coach or Jeff. I don't. There's none of this like stuff. Like I always just say, like I'm not worthy of you bowing. I'm just like you. We're here as a group trying to get better. You're part of this. I'm not better than you. Um, in fact, you're probably smarter than me because I'm the one paying all these bills here and putting up with what I do. Um, we're all somewhat even, like in a sense, but I guess except when it comes to all that coaching stuff, like know your place. I've got a wall of fame, and I just say to people, these people can run the class. They're the people you listen to. Nobody else. Like,
nice.
yeah.
I like that. So next question, Jeff, do you believe that Krav Maga taught in the Israel is different than what's being taught to general public?
From my understanding, a lot of it is based around using weaponry, which we don't do here in Australia. Like we
Yeah.
did all that stuff with all the fake stuff, but um, at the end of the day, fighting's fighting. There's no secret arts out there, and I know people want to find that stuff and want to find that if I just do this, that, and the other, it's gonna bring my attacker down. Like punching someone in the head is punching someone in the head, whether you have all your military garb on or not. A good punch is a good punch. So to me, would it be different? Like rules of engagement, various other things, there would be differences. But a good fighter is a good fighter under most context, really. So um, my limit, like I haven't been over there, but I have trained with people that have been in the Israeli military and things, and um, I haven't been blown away by what they can do. Um,
Yeah.
I've been more blown away by, like I said, sparring with some people that I know that have been in the UFC. Like they've made me stop and go, "Hey, yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
That reminds me a bit, and I think that's part of our human nature again, where we want to have things mystified. We like those. We almost like to suspend our disbelief, and or believe in the mythical, etc. And in Aikido there was this idea that the Japanese they know the real Aikido, like they're just like a level up. But then when
yeah,
I started to get exposed to like all the people around there, including Japanese, I was like, most of the times like they weren't much better at all. Like I met Westerners who were way better, but
yeah,
then in
yeah,
the hierarchy system, they would get lower grades because Japanese are a bit nationalistic. So
yeah, absolutely." Like if going back to that wrestler that came in who was 6 foot, 100 kilos, super athletic, you know, he's just has the potential to be on another level to the greatest Israeli fighter just because he's as big as he is. There's just people with genetic gifts out there that surpass whatever the art is. Like athleticism wins, genetics wins. Like if I was 30 kilos heavier, like then I'd be, thinking I'm pretty hot stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, like Shaquille O'Neal. If I had Shaquille O'Neal's body, then yeah, I'd be hammering people left, right, and center.
You're speaking about size, and this is a bit weirdly written question, but I think that can bring up a good thought of line. So, why do you think BGD has weight classes? And now this is probably a statement. It's not effective against bigger, stronger people. I think a question mark would be better here. But let's focus on why do you think BGD has weight classes?
Um, Probably the same as boxing. You got to categorize like the open weight stuff. Like you can't. A bigger, stronger person has an advantage. Like I was saying, the genetic difference. Like there's people that walk in like if you're 100 kilos and in shape, your ceiling's a whole lot higher than someone that walks in at 60 kilos that's not in shape. You have the potential to be so much better than them. So for that very reason, I think that's it. it's not effective against bigger, stronger people. Well, not necessarily. I think if you get and I can't talk about, if you've got a heavyweight go up against a lightweight or whatever the BJJ weight classes are, I think the heavyweight has advantages, but then there's, people like Marcelo Garcia who won the open weight tournament at a lighter weight. So, I mean, my advice when it comes to BJJ is make sure that you're striking during it. Combat jiu-jitsu, do that, because people are strikers by nature. People will hit. You've got to be able to deal with that. And if you're neglecting that side of what you're doing, it's not necessarily fighting. So I think if you're really good at it, you definitely could get to work against bigger, stronger people. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll chip in here quickly as well. And I think first of all, like, it's a myth that size doesn't matter, which again, some traditional martial arts, including Aikido, when I trained, was a heavy myth. It was like, oh, it's in Aikido, a smaller person can beat a bigger person. And I think that's like, it's not true. It's just an ideal, a utopia. I think BJJ personally, and maybe you may disagree with me, Jeff, but I think it's one of those few martial arts where it's possible. And I think that's what the open division is all about. And you can see, like, in the open division, you can see a small guy winning against big guys. It happens, but it doesn't mean it didn't like that same smaller person. If he would have that same technique and he was bigger, he would be like 10 times better than you, like badass than he was.
Yeah, absolutely. You scale him up, and he's an absolute weapon. Yeah, for sure.
We have a sponsored question, so I want to honor that. It's, how do you aim your punches? I think there's a bit of information missing. Would be better to know more details of what Jess Bakken means. But do you have an answer for that?
I could guess. Like, fighting isn't an exact science. And this is where one thing that sort of frustrates me is when people say, you must hit with these two knuckles. Well, my head is round, first of all. It's probably moving. And to sit there and, get that accurately, particularly throwing hooks and uppercuts and various other things, it's kind of hard to do. There's a reason why boxers take their hands and wear big gloves. It's not to protect their heads. It's to protect the hands of, people. So when you're in the middle of the fight, I mean, it's really difficult to sit there and focus directly, like stare at their chin or their mouth or something like that. You're firing hands in that vicinity, like, for the most part. Like, there's so much that you're watching. You're watching their arms, their legs, their, all those kinds of things that I think if you zero in on one thing, like if I'm intently staring at their jaw and that's what I'm aiming for, there's a good chance I'll miss a kick or I'll miss something else. Or, like, to me, it's almost like I'm fighting an outline. There's no real detail in it. I'm just throwing hands at that big round head. And people, this is where the argument comes in, do you use palms or punches? One thing that people often say when you talk about knife defense is, you got to accept you're going to get cut. Well, if you're going to have a fight, an empty-handed fight, you probably should accept that you're going to get hurt in some way. And I just had this discussion with a guy today, like, you can punch, palm, whatever you want to do. You're probably going to go to autopilot and do one of them. If all you get from a fight is a broken hand, that's not the worst outcome, really. It's not ideal, but it's not the worst outcome. So, like, that whole, really focusing on this and that detracts a little bit away from your defense. But yeah, it's kind of hard. And this, like, an area that I've sort of studied a lot lately is focus, like your attentional focus. And I know in basketball we talk about when you're dribbling the ball down the court, you have this like a fog light, I guess it's called, a fog light focus. So you're watching the whole court. So when you're in a self-defense situation, that's where you start. And then you go to spotlight, you focus on something sort of small. So in basketball, I'm dribbling down, this guy comes up and is defending me. It narrows my focus. A really good player can maintain that wide focus, but I, not being in the NBA or anything, have this narrow focus. So I'm looking at him. And in self-defense, we need to be able to do that as well, like to go from, your broad focus where you're looking all around, you're looking if he's got friends or whatnot, you want to narrow a bit, but you can't narrow it that much that, your focus is that small that you're staring at a jaw, because you'll miss feet coming at you, you'll miss them grabbing you, you'll miss their friends, you'll miss whatever else happens to be there. So specifically aiming your punches, I just throw them at their head. You know, Krav, they say to punch in the throat. I have a relatively long neck, but if I'm in my fighting stance, it's gone. So good luck trying to get a fist through there. Picture a guy that's heavier who doesn't have a neck. Good luck with that too. So I'm just throwing it at that head, like just throwing it up there, hoping for the best.
Jao is asking, are there, I guess that's the pronunciation, are there any other gyms that do the same thing as you do? How do you find a gym like yours? And actually, I'll just add to that. Did you ever consider like making some kind of a global, no bullshit association proved by this certain standard?
So I don't think I'm smart enough to do that. I have enough trouble managing my own things here. So there's not many of us around. There are some that train that way, and you just need to find a network, I guess, of like-minded people. But again, like people are in denial. They sit there and they look at ours and go, "Yeah, we train like that." Like the guy I was telling you about earlier, he's like, "Yeah, we train like that." And then I'm like, "Okay, show us your video." And I'm like, "Man, you're not in the ballpark." So people's perception and things are very different. But there is some people out there that do it. Few and far between, and there's few and far that are honest. In terms of that international thing, it'd be really good. Like I often thought of, you know, an association or a bunch of people that sit there and sort of objectively review what people do. So send in a video and we'll give you our honest opinion of it. And that would be good to sort of measure it. Or if, you know, you go, oh, I'm going to this school, this is what they do, and send it out. And there are people out there that could pick it to pieces and say how it could be improved and whatnot. But as far as doing that, like, yeah, it's kind of tough. There's people out there that sort of have the same mentality, but like I said, not many of us, not enough of us.
Um, just a fun comment. It's almost midnight in Lithuania. No, it's midnight in Australia, where Jeff is at. For me, it's sorry.
27 minutes past.
Yeah, so that's crazy. But we have people in the morning. I'm in the middle. Somebody is you're up late, but we won't go too long anymore. But there's just a couple more questions before we end today. So what traditional martial art is still effective? And Jung is saying, I don't think the fact that they're ancient really matters. I think it's more totalitarian rule and communism that hurt tradition. But you can just focus on what traditional martial art is still effective. Like, is there a martial art which is heavily invested in tradition that you would recommend over others?
Muay Thai.
That's a good one. I like that. What about judo?
Yeah, maybe they have a lot of good things, but again, they're lacking in other areas. Like we had a judo champion, heavyweight champion, come to our gym. He was another guy that I was sort of worried about, but he had no hands. Like he couldn't get close enough to judo the guys he sparred with, because by the time he came in, he ate 3-4 shots, and so it sort of nullified it. So I think it's part of the puzzle, but it's not. None of them really encompass the whole puzzle. Like I even think we're flawed in some ways. Like there's areas that we could improve upon as well. So there are pieces to the puzzle, and yeah, judo is probably a good example. I'll stick with Thai. I think Thai boxing is like, yeah, my favorite of all those. So yeah.
So it's a nice pick for a traditional martial art.
Yeah,
It does have
rim, movie, and all that
yeah,
stuff.
right.
Yeah,
There's that music and yeah. James added in there was that difficult question we were struggling with. He said, sorry about that, but our answer did help. So that's a win. Tarka Jedi saying that the interview is brilliant. We're doing a good enough job. Hooray. And James, again, a follow-up question, and we'll probably just touch a couple more and we'll end today. But do you train running or getting away from a situation?
Yes. So we do these drills, and when we do various things, so like we do a gauntlet for a grading where we're fortunate. Like I got to send you some footage of like our facility. So I rent a room in a university building, a vacant university building, which has probably about 80 different rooms in there that are all deserted, and we use a couple of them, probably most of them. And so we train a number of different things. Like I have this drill which I call stick and move, which is basically we pad up like we're kickboxing. You start to fight, and then when there's a lull in action, so you know what I mean? Like what self-defense fighting is like job's done, it's not back and forth. So what happens is people engage in a combination, and they're hitting, and then once there's separation where, you know, the people step back, one person is allocated that they have to run, and the other one runs after them. And it's one of the hardest drills you ever do. They'll run after them, and we have these stairs, and they'll jump down this. Like Matt's good because he's kind of athletic. He can do all these parkour and jump off and over stuff. And people chase him, and then it's funny because when we're running, we forget to fight, and when we're fighting, we forget to run. And as you're running, if someone grabs you, like, you know, I've done this a few times, and as I was running away, and I ran down this ramp and up the other side, and the guy ran over to the side and threw this punch over this ramp, and it connected because I'm too busy concentrating on doing this and not, you know, getting like not fighting or covering. And so we do a little bit of that in our gauntlet. Like what we do for gradings is people move through this building and people hide. And there's always an option where if you verbally de-escalate someone, there's someone there that's set up. Like if you give them absolutely no reason to attack you, they don't attack you. So there's that one. Some of the best drills that I do in that building is I'll send 2 people in this front doorway, and I'll say, you've got 30 seconds to run in the building and hide, and then I'll send 10 padded up people after them. So we kind of simulate, again, a little bit playing on the fantasy type things, where these 10 guys have, for some reason, I'm not sure what you've done, have chased you into this abandoned warehouse. You have to run and hide, and the only way you can get out is through this one door. And however you get out, it doesn't matter. You just got to get out. And if they find you, they'll bash you. Like there's a fight's on, and if, you know, I grab someone, I'm hitting them, and he gets it over me, I drop off like I'm knocked out. So then they've got rid of one person, they move to the next, and so forth. And that involves a lot of running. That involves, you know, quite often they'll sprint to the door, and you'll see them dive out the door and roll down, and yet they've got out safely. And we do that with knives as well. I have this thing called hide and go stab, which is like hide and go seek, but the people who are seeking have, you know, fake blades. So you got to hide, and you got to run around looking for them, and they have to run out this door and get away. And you're more successful running, we've found, than trying to fight, sort of thing. So you use the obstacles and barriers and whatnot. And we do some cool drills like that where, you know, it is to try and train them for running. The other thing I do is when we do drills, like in women's courses, like even today I did this one-on-one session with a married couple, and I basically, in the padded room, made this little corridor thing. The husband had to drag her into there. That was his van, and she had to fight to not get into the van. So we have an outcome, a goal. So it's not just I grab you and you get out of it. Like, and we make it a competition. So that makes the attacker try harder. And so, yeah, to answer your question, yes.
Okay, I think this will be the last one, but it's an interesting one. So would you say that there's too much emphasis in KM on learning to deal with attackers who don't actually know how to fight than attackers who have training and experience? How does this affect realism?
Going back to a comment I said earlier, like comparing ring fighting, sport fighting to self-defense, I guess fighting, you know, quite often the people think they can fight. I've ran some programs in some correctional facilities where I train boxing and various other things. So I try and get the inmates' aggression out so that they go back to their room and sleep, and we do boxing and various other things. And some of the scariest, meanest looking people cannot fight to save themselves. So I don't think that's an emphasis at all. Like, and I think just like it's more likely that it's going to happen. The person you are probably going to fight on the street isn't that good than if they're emotional and scared and nervous and all that stuff. Then their fighting ability will dip off as well, somewhat. So I don't think it's too much of an issue. But that when you're sort of advancing that student, you got to get like better people in. I used to ring up friends that were boxers to come in, and when we do the grading or kickboxers, I'd get them to hide and jump out and kickbox the shit out of my guys, you know, and just to take it past take it beyond that. So, yeah, I mean, it's an issue with all of them, but step it up a bit. Like, encourage them to step it up. Get some people who know how to fight. If you have some mates that do boxing or MMA, get them to try it out and attack you if you can, and do a lot of this stuff by yourself at home. You'll be surprised what you learn by yourself.
Nice. Oh, just another comment just said, I'm working out while listening to this. It's more motivating than a soundtrack. It's pretty cool. So, question for you, Jeff. What would you like me to plug? Your YouTube channel?
Yeah, maybe my YouTube channel or my Instagram. Like, I don't have much of an online sort of thing going at the moment. I'll be putting a couple of videos out very soon that are dealing with a couple of things that I think are interesting that sort of add to it. But yeah, maybe the YouTube channel is probably good.
Is that correct?
Enjoy to do it on Instagram, and maybe our Western Combatives Facebook page is another one that you can have a look at. I put stuff up there from time to time. Any of that stuff, yeah, it's all good.
Is there a website which connects all of it or has links to all of it?
Sort of. westerncombatives.com.au or westcom.com.au is my website. Or if you type in the old school Krav West, that was our old one, .com.au, that'll take you there as well.
Westcom.com.au?
Yep. Yeah.
Let me see if I can. Is that it?
Yep. That's the one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I really wanted to say a big thank you to you. It's just really cool to talk to you. There's, I feel we have a nice flow with the conversation, so I will not be surprised if people will see us together again. I'd love to visit your super cool warehouse. I'm I'm imagining it all. I'm like, holy crap!
I'll send it to you. It's
yeah. Send it to me.
The other thing, which is like a big stereotype with Australia. There's about 50 kangaroos that live on the premises on the site. So when we come up in the morning, in the afternoon, all these kangaroos jump, and I'm always putting them on Instagram. It's cool. It's
cool.
I would say it's up there with one of the best facilities in the world. I was lucky. I fell into it.
Wow. Yeah, would love to make a video of it one day. Obviously when lockdown is over, but yeah, very cool. So thank you again. Maybe we can stay for a couple more seconds after I finish the broadcast. But is there anything you want to just finish up and kind of give a message to everyone who's listening to before we finish up?
Jeez, I'm not much of an inspirational speaker.
But, you see, somebody said we're better than a soundtrack.
They can understand me and they find it inspirational. Like, yeah, thanks, Mum. Is that you, Mum? Thank you for. Yeah, just be objective. Like, look at the stuff that you're doing. It's easy to tell if it's real or not, or if it's somewhere on the continuum of realism. Just look at it. Look at it objectively. Take your emotional attachments out of it. Your emotional attachment to the style, the technique, the instructor, the system, the whoever, and just look at it. It's that easy, and test it.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Hard to do, but it's a simple thing.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, cool. So again, a quick note from me. So thank you again for watching, everyone. And there's a video, like a shorter video, which is featuring Jeff. That's Krav Maga versus Aikido, something like that. Type it in, you'll find it. But I hope everyone enjoyed it. And I like to say, my slogan is these days, keep owning your journey, everyone. So I'll finish with that. Cool.
Thank you.